The garage was quiet, except for the low hum of the fridge in the corner and the creak of old wood beneath my boots. It was past midnight. I should have been asleep hours ago. I had a job site walkthrough at 6 a.m., blueprints to finalize, client calls to return. But I couldn't sleep. Not after the message I just read. I stood there, still in my work clothes, hands stained from concrete dust, staring at the screen on my phone. The text from Vanessa was short. Casual. Heartless. I think I need space. I'm not in love anymore. 10 years together. A mortgage. A business I built from nothing. A daughter we both swore we'd protect no matter what. And this is how she ended it. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because 2 days after that message, I found out what she really meant by space. She wasn't trying to find herself. She was trying to disappear, with our daughter, our money, and some guy she met online. That night in the garage, something inside me broke, but something else woke up. Not rage. Not despair. Focus. She thought I'd beg. She thought I'd collapse. She thought I'd just let her go. She had no idea who she was really up against. And when she finally realized what I was doing, it was already too late. If this story hit you in the gut like it did me, thank you for watching, for listening, for understanding. To all the men out there who've been blindsided but refuse to break, you're not alone. Drop a 1 in the comments if this resonates with your story. I want to hear from you. And if you're still standing after the storm, like, subscribe, and share this with a brother who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, surviving isn't enough. We build again. Stronger. Edward Jennings was the kind of man who didn't need to talk about his values, you could see them in the way he lived. At 41, his hands were rough, calloused from 2 decades of swinging hammers and laying foundations, but his touch with his daughter was gentle, careful. He wasn't a flashy guy. No college degree hanging on the wall. No luxury car in the driveway. What he had was a name that meant something in his community, a reputation built with sweat, reliability, and showing up when he said he would. He ran a modest but successful construction company out of Austin, Texas, Jennings Contracting, something he'd started with a borrowed truck, a beat-up tool belt, and a stubborn refusal to fail. He took pride in the fact that every client who hired him once, called him again. Word of mouth was everything in his world, and his name traveled well. He was the first to rise, usually before the sun, sipping strong black coffee on the back porch while looking at blueprints or reviewing job schedules. He'd kiss his daughter Emma's forehead before she woke up, leave a note on the fridge for Vanessa if she was still asleep, and head out for another long day. Edward didn't chase success for ego. He did it for stability, for the family he cherished, for the house they built together, for the future they talked about when they were still dreaming. He believed in structure, in routine, in making life better one decision at a time. He didn't drink much, never gambled, didn't run around. Just worked, provided, and came home to be a father and husband. He loved being a dad. Emma, barely over a year old, had a laugh that could melt concrete. She was the reason he kept pushing through every 14-hour day, why he built a miniature playhouse in the backyard by hand, sanding the edges twice to make sure she wouldn't get a splinter. For Edward, devotion didn't come in big gestures, it showed up in little things, quiet things. He wasn't perfect, but he showed up. Every damn day. And for a long time, he thought that was enough. Until he learned it wasn't. It hadn't always been like this. Before things unraveled, Vanessa was the kind of woman who lit up a room without even trying. Edward met her at a friend's backyard cookout 8 years ago. She was sharp, quick-witted, with this fire in her eyes that made everything she said feel important. Back then, she worked in marketing, one of those tech startups with colorful bean bags and glass-walled meeting rooms. She talked fast, moved fast, and had big plans. He was drawn to her ambition, she was drawn to his groundedness. "You're the most solid man I've ever met," she once told him, lying on his chest after their second date. She meant it. At least, he thought she did. They moved fast. Married within 2 years. Bought a house. Edward insisted on doing most of the renovations himself, and started talking about kids. When Vanessa got pregnant, she brought up staying home for a while. She wanted to be there for the early years, be the kind of mom she said she never had. Edward supported it without hesitation. His business was steady enough to carry the load, and if it meant more time for her to bond with their daughter, he was all in. The first few months after Emma was born were tough, sure, but they were in it together. Or so he thought. Emma was everything to him. A tiny mirror of their best moments, with Vanessa's eyes and Edward's laugh. From the first time she grabbed his finger in the hospital, he was done. He rearranged job sites to make it to doctor's appointments. Built her crib by hand. Slept on the floor next to her crib when she was sick. She gave him clarity. Purpose. On the worst days, hearing her little voice call out Dada made everything else fall away. He lived for her joy, unfiltered, innocent, real. But somewhere along the way, something changed in Vanessa. It started small. Offhand comments about feeling like just a mom. Jokes about needing a break from the routine. Then came the silence. She started staying up later, scrolling her phone long after Emma was asleep. Stopped laughing at Edward's bad jokes. Started calling everything fine with that flat, distant tone that didn't match her words. At first, Edward brushed it off. Everyone gets tired, especially with a baby. But over time, the warmth faded. She wasn't angry, just absent, like she'd quietly stepped out of their life and forgotten to come back. The shift from silence to suspicion didn't happen overnight. It crept in like a slow fog. At first, Edward was just grateful Vanessa was getting out of the house. Girl nights, she called them. Once a week, then twice. Then suddenly, it was every other night. Edward would come home from a 10-hour workday to find Emma half asleep in front of the TV, cold leftovers on the counter, and Vanessa nowhere to be found until well past midnight. She'd breeze in smelling like rose and expensive perfume, eyes glassy, smiling like nothing was wrong. She started dressing differently too, more makeup, tighter clothes, heels she hadn't worn in years. Edward tried not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just reclaiming herself, feeling confident again. He wanted to believe that. He wanted her to feel good. But what gnawed at him wasn't just how she was dressing, it was how she was disappearing. Even when she was home, she wasn't there. Always on her phone. Always just checking something or chatting with the girls. Emma would toddle up, arms raised, and Vanessa would barely glance away from her screen. Edward took over more and more, bath time, feeding, playtime, appointments, telling himself it was just a phase. But a man notices. When his wife stops touching his hand on the couch. When she stops laughing. When he's just a piece of furniture in her daily routine. Edward chalked it up to stress, hormones, burnout. He didn't want to admit what he feared deep down. Maybe it wasn't just the baby blues. Maybe she was already gone. Then came the call that pulled the mask all the way off. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Edward was on his lunch break, sitting in his truck outside a supplier's yard, halfway through a cold sandwich when his phone buzzed. It was Marcus, his buddy from high school. They didn't talk much these days, but Marcus's girlfriend, Tara, had some kind of online gaming hobby. "Dude," Marcus said without even saying hello. "You gotta call me. Now." 10 minutes later, they were on the phone. Marcus sounded uneasy. "Look, I wasn't gonna say anything, man, but Tara's been in this online group, Discord or whatever, with Vanessa. She's seen some stuff. Stuff that's not okay." Edward's stomach tightened. What kind of stuff? Late-night conversations. Private messages. Some guy named Zane. Says he gets her in ways you never could. "Dude, I think your wife is having some kind of emotional affair." The sandwich in Edward's lap slid onto the floor, untouched. That night, Edward didn't confront her. He didn't rage, didn't accuse, didn't say a word. Instead, he watched. Observed. Vanessa had gotten comfortable, too comfortable. She wasn't even hiding her secrets anymore. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen island while she showered, unlocked and glowing, as if daring him to look. And so he did. What he found wasn't just confirmation, it was devastation. Dozens of messages, stretching back weeks, all between Vanessa and a man named Zane. Edward didn't need to scroll far to understand what was happening. The language was intimate, flirty, sometimes vulgar. They'd exchanged pictures, photos Vanessa had taken in their bedroom, in his hoodie, wearing his ring. But what hit the hardest were the conversations about Emma. Plans to move. Plans to figure out child support. Plans to explain to a judge why Edward didn't deserve to be part of his daughter's life. He's too stiff, too cold. He thinks being a good dad is just changing diapers and paying bills, she'd written. Zane understands me. He makes me feel seen. They were already fantasizing about a life together, across the country. She even calculated how much alimony she could get. Edward read in silence, jaw tight, fists clenched on the edge of the counter. He took screenshots of everything and emailed them to himself. Then he closed the laptop exactly as he found it, wiped his fingerprints off the keys, and walked out of the room like nothing had happened. Later, lying alone in the guest room, Edward stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The betrayal wasn't just sexual. It was spiritual. This wasn't a moment of weakness, it was a campaign. Coordinated. Premeditated. And what broke him more than anything was the realization that while he was building a future, Vanessa was quietly planning to erase him from it. By morning, something inside Edward had shifted. The ache was still there, dull, low, ever-present, but the panic was gone. The tears that had threatened in the dark never came. Not because he didn't hurt. God, he did. But the pain had frozen into something colder. Sharper. Purposeful. He sat at the kitchen table with his second cup of black coffee, watching the steam curl into the morning air, and made a decision. He wasn't going to fall apart. He wasn't going to scream or beg or play the part of the heartbroken fool. I'm not going to react, he thought. I'm going to respond. He had spent his entire adult life solving problems, managing chaos, taking plans from paper to reality. This would be no different. Vanessa might have underestimated him, she probably thought he was too slow, too passive, too blue-collar to ever catch on. But Edward had been paying attention longer than she realized. And now? Now he was building something else. Not a house. A strategy. He looked over at the baby monitor, hearing Emma stir in her crib. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know that her mother was planning to take her away from the only real home she'd ever known. And Edward would be damned if he let that happen. The time for heartbreak had passed. What came next was clarity. He didn't want revenge, not in the bitter, angry sense. He didn't want to ruin Vanessa. He just wanted the truth exposed, the lies burned down, and his daughter safe. He reached for his phone and opened his contacts. First, his lawyer friend Dave. Then the bank. Then a security company a client had mentioned last year, back when Edward thought home protection meant cameras in case of porch pirates. Each call he made felt like laying down another brick. This wasn't rage. This wasn't weakness. This was construction. He would let Vanessa believe she was winning. Let her keep texting her fantasy poet while he documented her every move. And when the time came to show his hand, he wouldn't need to yell. He'd just show the receipts. That same week, Edward put his plan into motion. He started with the cameras. Not hidden ones, nothing illegal. Just a basic home security system installed in the common areas of the house. The living room, kitchen, hallway. All completely above board. He even told Vanessa about them. Client had a break-in last month, he said casually over dinner. Figured it wouldn't hurt to get some protection installed here. She barely looked up from her phone. Do whatever you want, she mumbled, thumbs still tapping away. Perfect. Next came the financial firewall. He opened a separate bank account at a different credit union across town. Moved just enough into it to prepare for legal fees and future emergencies, not enough to draw suspicion, but enough to give himself breathing room. For years, every paycheck had gone into their joint account. But now he knew better. He scheduled a meeting with an attorney, a woman named Sarah Castillo. A no-nonsense family lawyer who specialized in high-conflict custody and father's rights. Edward had found her through a referral from a fellow contractor who'd been through a messy divorce of his own. Sarah didn't sugarcoat anything. She read through the screenshots, looked over the financials, and leaned back in her chair with a slow nod. "You've got a case," she said. "But you need to keep documenting. Dates, times, parenting activity. The more you can show she's emotionally and physically checked out, the stronger your position becomes. Courts still lean toward the mother by default, but that changes when the father shows he's doing the real parenting." Edward nodded, jaw set. "I'm already on it." From that day forward, he became meticulous. Every diaper change, every bottle prepared, every bedtime story, he logged it. He kept grocery receipts, appointment reminders, even photos of Emma's meals when Vanessa wasn't home to cook. Not out of spite, but because this was now evidence. Proof. Meanwhile, Vanessa drifted further. She slept in, often until noon. Spent hours glued to her phone or FaceTiming from the patio. She missed 2 of Emma's checkups in a row and forgot to restock formula twice. Edward didn't argue. He just handled it, and made notes. Every time she left for another girl's night, he recorded the time she left, when she returned, and who watched Emma while she was gone. He wasn't stalking. He was preparing. Quietly. Legally. Thoroughly. Vanessa thought she was in control. But Edward had finally stepped out of denial. And now, with every quiet step, he was taking that control back. Edward knew that custody battles weren't just won in court, they were won in perception. So, he took another step most men in his position might have skipped: therapy. Not to try and win Vanessa back, he was long past that point, but to show, both to the court and to himself, that he was willing to do the work. He found a licensed counselor named Dr. Martin, older guy, calm demeanor, the type who didn't waste time on cliches. They met once a week, and Edward was honest. He talked about the betrayal, the rage that threatened to boil over but never did. He talked about Emma, how his biggest fear wasn't losing Vanessa, it was losing his daughter's trust someday. Dr. Martin listened, gave him tools, and, most importantly, documented every session. Edward made sure to keep the receipts, the appointment confirmations, the notes. He created a digital folder with every text, every grocery bill, every photo of Vanessa on her phone while Emma sat alone on the floor. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was preparation. But just as he was building a rock-solid case, Vanessa made her move. It started with subtle shifts, friends growing colder, old neighbors giving him tight-lipped nods instead of warm hellos. Then his own mother called, her voice tight. "Edward. Vanessa said you've been distant. That you're emotionally shutting her out." He knew right then what was happening. Vanessa was flipping the script. Spinning a new story, casting herself as the emotionally abandoned wife and him as the cold, detached husband. She was weaponizing his silence. But Edward didn't lash out. He stayed calm. Quiet. He started reaching out to people, showing them the screenshots, the therapy logs, the videos of Emma calling Mama while Vanessa scrolled right past her. And slowly, the tide began to turn. The truth wasn't loud. But it was solid. And it was starting to show. Just when Edward thought she might be backing off, Vanessa made her boldest move yet. It came on a Tuesday morning, slipped in with the regular mail, thick envelope, stamped from her attorney. He opened it at the kitchen table, Emma babbling happily in her high chair, sticky with yogurt and Cheerios. Inside was a formal petition. Vanessa was filing for full physical custody of Emma. Her claim? Edward was emotionally unavailable, controlling, and incapable of providing the nurturing environment their daughter needed. He stared at the paper, expressionless. His hands didn't shake. His heart didn't race. Because this was exactly what he'd been preparing for. She had underestimated him. Again. Vanessa's official statement painted a version of their life that Edward didn't even recognize. In her words, she was a dedicated mother, exhausted by her husband's coldness and obsession with work. She claimed he was detached, dismissive, even intimidating. She said he used money as leverage, controlled her every move, and only took an interest in Emma when it was convenient for his image. It was fiction. All of it. But he knew fiction could sound like truth if told confidently enough, especially in court. Edward stood, wiped Emma's mouth with a warm cloth, and kissed the top of her head. Then he picked up the phone and called Sarah. "She's trying to erase me," he said. "Let's show them who the real parent is." The gloves were off now. And Edward wasn't playing defense anymore. Courtroom days have a strange kind of tension, quiet, clinical, but charged like a thunderstorm just out of sight. Edward sat in a stiff back chair, button-down ironed, boots shined, jaw set. On the outside, he looked calm. But inside, every nerve buzzed. This wasn't just legal. This was about Emma. About his name. His role as a father. His life. Sarah, his attorney, was unshakable. She came in organized, composed, and fully loaded. While Vanessa's lawyer opened with a narrative about emotional neglect and control, Sarah sat still, letting them talk. She didn't interrupt. She let the accusations pile up, Vanessa crying softly on the stand, speaking about how Edward made her feel invisible, how she did everything alone, and how she feared for Emma's emotional development under such a rigid household. When it was Sarah's turn, she didn't waste time. She began by methodically laying out Edward's calendar, documented parenting logs spanning months. Diaper changes. Pediatric visits. Notes on feedings. Bedtimes. Sick days. All logged with timestamps and even backup from his mother and daycare check-ins. Then came the bank records, purchases for baby essentials, groceries, medications. All from Edward. Vanessa hadn't bought diapers in weeks. After that, the surveillance footage. Sarah pulled up clips from their home system. The courtroom watched as Emma toddled up to her mother, toy in hand, while Vanessa sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. In one clip, Emma called out, "Mama," again and again. Vanessa didn't even look up. Just mumbled, "Go play." The judge watched in silence. Then Sarah dropped the final blow, screenshots of Vanessa's messages to Zane. The ones where she mocked Edward, called him a boring ATM, and laughed about planning to leave the state with Emma. Even worse, Vanessa discussing how to frame things to make him look unstable. Vanessa's face turned pale. Her attorney tried to push back, bringing up postpartum depression, emotional disconnect, and Edward's long work hours. But none of it stuck. Because they had no proof. No logs. No therapy records. No receipts. Just her word, and Edward's team had more than enough to counter it. The judge wasn't harsh, but his tone was firm when he addressed Vanessa. "Mrs. Jennings, what I see here is a father who, despite a demanding work schedule, made every effort to be involved in his daughter's life. Meanwhile, your behavior raises questions about your commitment to co-parenting and your willingness to act in your child's best interest." Edward didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He just sat still, listening, while the truth finally began to speak louder than the lies. He hadn't just survived the attack, he'd turned it around, brick by brick, just like he'd built everything else in his life. The final ruling came a week later. Edward returned to the same courtroom, hands steady, tie straight, his lawyer at his side. Vanessa was already there, seated alone at the far end of the bench, tapping her knee anxiously beneath a crisp gray dress that didn't quite mask the bags under her eyes. The judge didn't waste time with small talk. After briefly reviewing the findings, he leaned forward and delivered the decision. In the best interest of the child, and based on the evidence presented, the court awards primary physical custody of Emma Jennings to the father, Edward Jennings. The words rang through the room like a hammer on steel. Edward kept his expression neutral, but inside, a wave of something like relief and heartbreak collided at once. The mother, Vanessa Jennings, the judge continued, is to receive supervised visitation until further review can confirm a stable, child-appropriate environment and demonstrated parental involvement. No alimony. No relocation permission. No leverage. It wasn't a moment of triumph. It was survival. A necessary win for Emma. For stability. For truth. As they left the courtroom, Sarah gave Edward a quiet nod. "You did everything right," she said. He just nodded back. He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired. But free. Vanessa unraveled quickly after that. Over the next several days, Edward's phone lit up constantly. One message would be furious, full of blame, venom, accusations of betrayal. "You turned my daughter against me. You're a monster, Edward. I gave up everything for this family." Then, like clockwork, the tone would flip. "Please, let's talk. You don't understand what I was going through. Maybe we can fix this, for Emma." He didn't reply. Not because he hated her, but because he finally saw her clearly. Every message was a variation of the same thing, regret wrapped in manipulation. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry it hadn't worked. And Edward wasn't about to step back into the storm he'd just walked through. As weeks passed, Vanessa's messages slowed, and the silence that followed was louder than any of her earlier rage. Edward figured she was either regrouping or finally accepting the outcome, but then he heard the real story. It started with a phone call from Marcus. Same friend who had warned him before. His voice was low, cautious. "Hey man, I don't know if you've heard, but Vanessa went out to California." Edward blinked. "What? To meet Zane?" "Yeah. She borrowed money from her parents, drained what was left of her savings, and flew out there." The fantasy had come to life, but not for long. According to Marcus, Vanessa had arrived expecting romance, redemption, a fresh start with the man who understood her. Instead, Zane turned out to be exactly what Edward suspected, a grifter in a hoodie. No job. No plan. Just a couch in his mom's basement and a fake charm that evaporated the moment she landed. He took her money, around $3,000, under the pretense of putting a deposit down for their future place, then disappeared for 2 days. When he came back, drunk and dismissive, Vanessa confronted him. He laughed in her face. "You really thought this was a love story," he reportedly told her. Then he humiliated her further. The photos she'd sent him? The private conversations where she poured out her emotional misery and resentment toward Edward? He started leaking them, first in private Discord servers, then, allegedly, onto forums under fake usernames. Vanessa's dream had crumbled into a nightmare. Zane didn't just break her trust, he mocked her. Used her. Left her with nothing but debt, shame, and a one-way flight back to the life she tried to burn down. Edward found out through one of Marcus's friends, who happened to stumble across the leaked material online. He didn't even know what he was looking at until he recognized Vanessa's voice in a voice note clip. His stomach turned as the details came in. Zane had posted screenshots of their chats along with crude commentary, mocking her vulnerability like it was a joke to the internet. Edward didn't feel joy. He didn't feel vindicated. Just a quiet, heavy sadness, for the woman she used to be, and the ruin she'd chosen over the family that once stood right in front of her. It was late one evening when Edward's phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a California area code. He almost ignored it, assuming it was spam, but something told him to answer. When he did, all he heard at first was breathing. Then a shaky voice he hadn't heard in weeks, fragile and stripped of all the fire it once held. "Edward, it's me," Vanessa said. I messed up. I made a huge mistake." She was crying, not the performative sobs he'd grown used to during arguments, but something deeper. Desperate. Broken. She admitted it all, how Zane had used her, how he took everything and left her stranded. How she had to call her parents, tail between her legs, to get a flight home. How her friends online disappeared the second she stopped being entertaining. "I thought he loved me," she whispered. "I thought he was different." There was a long pause before she dropped the line Edward had been waiting for since the whole thing began. Can we try again? For Emma's sake?" Edward closed his eyes, listening to the static between them. He heard the voice of a woman who finally realized she was never the main character in her own fantasy. Only a footnote in someone else's game. But he had nothing left to give her. "I'm not going to scream at you, Vanessa. I'm not even angry anymore," he said, voice calm. "But you made a choice. You don't get to walk back into this house like none of it happened." She started to protest, mumbled something about healing, about therapy, about wanting her family back. He cut in gently. "I'll help you get on your feet. I'll send you some resources, job leads, even a few counselors I trust. But that's for Emma's sake. Not for us. There's no us anymore." She didn't argue this time. She just cried. And for the first time, Edward didn't feel the urge to reach for her. She was a stranger now. A painful chapter in a story that had already moved on. The silence that followed Vanessa's final call wasn't heavy, it was peaceful. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt like a home again. The tension that used to hang in the air like fog had lifted, and all that remained was clarity and the sound of a little girl's laughter echoing through the hallways. Edward focused on what mattered most, Emma. He'd always been a provider, but now he made sure he was present. Fully. Completely. He scaled back his work hours, promoted his foreman, Tim, a guy who'd been with him since year 2, to oversee day-to-day site operations. It was a risk, but one worth taking. The extra hours at home weren't wasted. He converted the garage into a full-blown playroom for Emma. Not just a few toys and a rug, this was a full renovation. He painted the walls sky blue with white, hand-painted clouds. Installed soft flooring, a mini library in the corner, an art nook, and even a small climbing wall with thick padding. He built most of it himself, every shelf measured with precision, every detail infused with care. Emma thrived in the space. She lit up every time she stepped into it, her tiny hands flipping through books, crayons everywhere, her laughter bouncing off the walls. Edward would sit on the floor, watching her build towers of blocks, realizing this was what peace looked like, what real purpose felt like. He hadn't expected to find love again. It wasn't even on his radar. But life has a way of bringing light in from places you least expect. It started small, routine pediatric visits for Emma. That's where he met Claire. A soft-spoken nurse with kind eyes and a laugh that felt warm, not forced. They talked a little at first, just small exchanges over checkup details, but over time, it turned into conversations that lingered. Claire didn't ask about the drama. She didn't pry. She simply listened. And more than that, she saw him. Not as a case to fix or a broken man to rescue. She saw a father. A provider. A man who had endured something quietly, and came out stronger. She connected with Emma instantly. Patient. Playful. The kind of gentle that only comes from someone who genuinely loves kids. For Edward, it wasn't about moving on, it was about finally moving forward. With someone who didn't take his strength for granted. Someone who saw his silence as depth, not distance. Mornings became Edward's favorite part of the day. No rush, no quiet tension in the kitchen, just the smell of pancakes, the sound of Emma's bare feet padding across the floor, and her little voice calling out, "Daddy, look," as she held up another crayon masterpiece. He never realized how many moments he'd missed before, how often his mind was at job sites while his daughter was growing before his eyes. Now, every giggle, every mispronounced word, every dimpled smile, it all felt like oxygen. He stopped checking the clock during story time. If Emma wanted to read the same book 3 times in a row, he read it. If she wanted to sing The Wheels on the Bus at full volume while dancing in her pajamas, he sang with her. Her laughter, pure and unfiltered, had become his healing. It filled the spaces in him that used to ache. The weight he'd carried for so long had lifted, not because the pain was gone, but because something more important had taken its place. He didn't need grand plans anymore. His purpose was right in front of him. Every time Emma wrapped her tiny arms around his neck and whispered, "I love you, Daddy." Vanessa's visits were now supervised by a court-appointed third party. Once every 2 weeks. Short, structured, monitored. Edward never said much during drop-offs. He didn't have to. The contrast spoke for itself. On one particular visit, as Vanessa stepped onto the porch to collect Emma, she glanced inside. She saw the cozy chaos of their living room, the toys neatly organized, Emma's artwork taped to the fridge, Claire's sweater draped over the armrest. Her eyes lingered for a second longer than usual. Edward saw it, that flicker of recognition, of realization. But he didn't return it. No anger. No smile. Just quiet understanding. She had walked away from this life. And now, it belonged to someone else. If the person you trusted most, the one you built a life with, shared a home with, raised a child with, turned around and tried to erase you from your own daughter's world, could you ever truly forgive them? Not just the act, but the intent. Not the pain, but the premeditation. When someone you love rewrites your story, not just to leave, but to replace you, do you ever look back? Or do you draw the line, not out of bitterness, but because self-respect demands it? I want to hear from you. Whether you're a father, a mother, or someone who's been burned by betrayal, how did you deal with it? Did you find peace, or are you still picking up the pieces? Drop a comment below. Your story might help someone else going through the fire right now. Because the truth is, we don't talk about this enough. And some of us carry battles no one ever sees. They say men don't feel pain. That we bottle it up. That we just move on like it's part of the job. But I felt it. Every betrayal. Every lonely dinner. Every time I stared at the ceiling, wondering if my daughter would grow up believing I didn't care. And still, I stood up. I didn't let anger turn me into something bitter. I let purpose rebuild me. Every playroom shelf I installed, every meal I cooked, every bedtime story I read wasn't just for Emma. It was for me too. A reminder that I didn't lose, I chose better. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's building a life so solid, so full of peace and love and purpose, that the person who threw it all away has to watch from a distance, knowing they'll never be part of it again. And sometimes, you don't need to burn the bridge. You just need to build something better on the other side.